So thank you everyone for coming to week 2 of Utopia. Today is a bit of a special day in that we're having our first discussion topic, which is going to be in regards to the relationship between India and Pakistan. Just a quick disclaimer to you all today to make sure that I'm laying out the groundworks for the rules and guidelines in terms of what is expected for everybody's behavior and participation. Understandably, today's topic is not one without its controversy and political sensitive nature, but we at Utopia strongly believe that these issues need to be spoken out such that these conversations will allow us to foster an environment where we can resolve these issues peacefully and also think about the prospects for the long run, because these issues, once they are covered up or hidden from sight, they often escalate and grow in size over time. So it's important that we have these sorts of talks as we are doing right now. And it's also the significance of Utopia in having bilateral, nonpartisan communication across political lines. And let's see if there's anything else that I wanted to add. So in terms of the expectations, sort of what we have in line for the policy guidelines and enforcement of Utopia's code of conduct is for the members or attendees who are exhibiting a sort of hostile, negative reactions in regards to the topic and manifest that in sort of attacks directed at people, those are strongly discouraged from Utopia, and the consequences will be that you will be asked to leave the meetings. Remember, this is a platform where only attacks on ideas are allowed rather than on the people and the characteristics of the individuals. So we strongly encourage everyone to have just a civil and a constructive mindset as we move forward into today's topic meeting. All right, so normally I'll go straight into the presentation, but it seems like we have some new members here with us today. So Ashwin, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hi guys, my name's Ashwin, and yeah, I just joined in this meeting because the topic really sparked an interest in me, and I wanted to audit and listen into how guys view Kashmir as an issue from outside. Being raised in India, I feel like I've had a very myopic perspective of the entire thing, so I would want to broaden my perspective about it. Yeah.
And also to add upon Ashwin's point, it's important, or we're going to allow many opportunities throughout the presentation for audience members to directly engage with the discussion or subject matter at hand. So please feel free to speak up both before, during, and after the presentation to sort of incorporate your inputs on the subject whenever there are parts where you feel like you have some sort of knowledge or personal experience with, and sort of facilitate a constructive dialogue sort of environment. All right. So presenters, Anne and Isha, are you guys ready to go ahead and share your presentations?
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm ready. So Isha, can you please present?
Sure. Yeah, so we actually created sort of a lecture at the very beginning, which we will be running through. And you guys are definitely welcome to jump in and just let me know whenever you want to jump in with your own opinion or anything. This is really just a presentation and it's a discussion as well. So it's an effort to explain India and Pakistan's strained relations, and we will be focusing on the region of Kashmir. And if you want to take over.
Yeah, sure. So relations between Pakistan and India have long been a complex and hostile issue in South Asia due to their history and politics. So after the violent partition of British India, which have started the border disputes of Kashmir, their relationship between Pakistan and India has escalated into wars and immense hostility. So is that therefore we using Kashmir to structure our presentation on the relation of India and Pakistan because Kashmir is rooted from a territorial dispute between India and Pakistan, um, but now it has evolved into a controversial, multifaceted issue that has increasingly gained the immense global attention. So, Kashmir conflicts um, escalate have also have escalated into a global issue due to the parties that involve with having nuclear powers and also the terrorist involvement. So our presentation is an effort to bring in the discussions about the dispute, the history, and potential step of peaceful resolution. So as you can see from the map here, Kashmir is just a landlocked region embedded between China, India, and Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And yeah, so let's walk through our presentation about this region.
Actually,
Yeah.
before we move on to the next slide, I wanted to ask you guys a question. Kashmir as a region also has many sub-regions incorporated inside as well. So as I can see from the map currently right now, there seems to be a region called Ladakh. I know Kashmir is also called Jammu and Kashmir from other sources. So could you guys perhaps elaborate on maybe the subdivisions within Kashmir and how maybe people or culture different within those regions?
I can try and explain. I don't know too much about the specific parts of Kashmir, but when it comes down to it, Jammu and Kashmir are thought to be as Indian territory, and that's what's in the Indian control right here, if you guys can see. And then there is a Pakistani controlled region right now because they have occupied that area. And as you guys know, this is a very contested region where all of these powers want control. So Pakistan wants control, India wants control, and China wants control. And there are specific reasons that each of these nations want control over this area. And yeah, anyone else is willing to pop in with explanations or possible extra knowledge that they have.
Yeah. So after the wars, the first war between Pakistan and India, they established a line of control, as you can see in red over there. That is a temporary border line that's separate from the control of Kashmir between Pakistan and India. And also, yeah. So, and Srinagar is the capital city of Kashmir, from what I'm understanding. Um, yeah.
I'm gonna make a quick shout out to Kevin. Kevin, do you happen to know why China might be interested, or as you can see from the map, China has control over a region of Kashmir. I was wondering if you could input maybe a historical perspective on why China might consider that region to be their land.
I don't really know the history about it behind
Okay.
it, but
Okay.
I guess it's like what we always say, like historically this is part of China, so well we need to take it back, like something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, China also has an alliance with Pakistan right now, so that could also explain part of their interest in the area itself.
Yeah.
Actually, there was a war fought between India and China in 1962 over this territory, and the thing was China was claiming dominion over some of the northeastern territories that India had, including the state of Arunachal Pradesh, and China didn't really claim territory, not all of it, but I think these were also spoils from the war that was fought, which India lost heavily, which India suffered major losses in that war, and was like a wake up call to the Indian military.
Yeah. I think
and their territorial
like
integrity.
I know a little about that war. I think like China won it, but China just retreated because that region it's very hard for you to maintain the supply. So China also although like China won, but like we can like maintain like the victory for a long time. So we just retreated.
Definitely. And the region itself is very disputed over as a whole. some like I know that India wants complete control of this region, and so does Pakistan. So there is a lot of dispute over what country this region belongs to. So I think that we can move on to the next slide so that we can start getting into this issue.
Sure. Yeah, so this is the overview of our presentation. We will go through with you the history and background, and also open discussion about the different outlooks for Kashmir in the future. We also tap on the terrorism and human rights violation issue in Kashmir. And last but not least, the last discussion will be, is there a peaceful resolution for Kashmir? Yeah. Please continue, Esha.
Yeah. So first, I want to touch upon British rule over India, because before British rule and the partition in India, both Hindus and Muslims were able to cohabit the region without tension due to the current religious displacement and mutual distrust that those people in that region face. So I kind of pulled this quote from The Atlantic. I thought it was really poignant, and it kind of explained the situation a lot better than I could. For the ink was not yet dry on the 1947 Charter of Sovereignty before what had been one great single nation became split into two sullenly hostile countries, Pakistan and India. So British imperialism and its aftermath is key in understanding the conflict between the two nations. So I just wanted to pull up a video about how the British initially conquered India. I think it's important to understand this before we can start talking about the nationalism and other things that ensued from this conquering of India. So let's jump into the video.
This video was made possible by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, online store, or website, make it with Squarespace. Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. Today's episode, how the British Empire was able to assert control over India.
Prime and low.
The Indian subcontinent was subjugated by an island more than 20 times smaller in size. This unimaginable conquest of what would become the jewel in the British crown greatly empowered the British Empire. By the middle of the 19th century, British rule led to a new wave of South Asian nationalist movements, the effects to which are still felt to this day. But we're not going to be delving into too much detail about the consequences of British rule. Rather, our goal is to evaluate what actions taken by the British and Indians alike paved the way for British rule in the first place. In order to understand how the British were able to take control of India, we need to go back to New Year's Eve on 1600, well into the reign of Elizabeth I. It was her signature on a royal charter granted to a group of adventure merchants, later known as the East India Company, that would change the destinies of two nations forever. However, at the time, the company's leaders were not yet interested in trading directly with the reigning Indian power of the time. Instead, they focused on competing with the Dutch, French, and Portuguese in the East Indies. But over time, the East India Company, after being driven out of the East Indies, shifted its focus onto the Indian subcontinent. In 1640, a company representative succeeded in securing a grant of land in southern India, a pivotal moment, as it marked the first time that Indian land was owned directly by the English. It was on this land that they constructed Fort St. George. The settlement that grew around this region became the thriving city of Madras, now known as Chennai, and home to over 7 million people. As more and more company-owned forts and settlements sprang up all over the Indian subcontinent, the English became a leading exporter of spices, which, in the words of Brian Gardner, author of the East India Company, had a considerable place in life. Men were prepared to die in search of them, and many did. No gift was more acceptable, and to be well supplied was a mark of status. Wealth could be measured in spices. The French, Danish, and Dutch all became similarly active in Indian affairs from the 17th century onwards, with the Portuguese already established in the region. Joining me now is our good friend History with Hilbert, who will be providing us with some background information on the Mughal Empire.
As the 18th century commenced, the Europeans became increasingly involved in Indian affairs. They could afford to, because the Mughal Empire, which once ruled over not just the majority of India, but also parts of modern-day Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh, was on the decline in the wake of very costly wars of conquest. The Mughals suffered from repeated invasions by Persians, Afghans, and other Indians. In 1739, the Mughal capital, Delhi, was sacked by the Persian ruler Nader Shah, following the decisive Battle of Kurna, and in 1748, Nader Shah's protege, the Afghan Ahmed Shah Durrani, also led his armies into Mughal territory, beginning his own invasion. Due to these factors, by the middle of the 18th century, the Mughal emperor took the role of a figurehead to many new empowered local rulers. If you'd like to check out my video that goes into more detail about the Mughals, then follow the link in the description below.
Thanks for joining us again, Hilbert. As the Mughals weakened, the Maratha kingdom in the central west of India was carving out an empire of its own. Despite never eclipsing the Mughal Empire at its height, the Maratha Empire remained as a dominant power in India for another 80 years or so. As all of this was happening, the East India Company began to overshadow its European competitors, devoting substantial profits to raising a private army in an effort to contend with the Maratha Empire and Bengal. By now, the East India Company benefited greatly from the country's imposing navy, which enabled it to ferry more and more men to India than its European competitors. As much as the company's military aided in its growth, it was the laissez-faire policy that won over many local rulers to their side, many of whom benefited financially from their dealings with the company and did not perceive their sovereignty to be at risk. Of all the Europeans who had established themselves in India, the British and French based in the south were now preeminent. But under the daring Robert Clive, the British East India Company's army was able to defeat both the Bengalese and their French allies at the Battle of Plassey during the 7 Years' War, which, by the 1760s, allowed them to assert control over much of the Indian subcontinent unchecked through direct territorial possession or indirect tributary arrangements. To quote Gardner once more, by the Treaty of Paris 1763, the French forts taken by the company were returned to them, some of them having been razed to the ground. But the French never recovered, and only 6 years later, the French East India Company collapsed, although the stations remained in the possession of France. During the British advance into the Indian heartland, it encountered staunch resistance from the Sikh Empire and other Indian states not interested in doing business with the English. The Duke of Wellington, who would later go on to defeat Napoleon, won several victories against these states while aiding his brother Richard Wellesley, who acted as Governor General of India. Consequently, by the turn of the 19th century, the Wellesley brothers had succeeded in leaving behind them the foundations of an empire greater even that of Akbar himself.
We have enemy ships at Sector 47. It's a trap.
As the middle of the 19th century drew closer, an Indian national consciousness began to take form, as company rule resulted in a wider array of social and economic reforms being demanded from increasingly alienated local rulers. These sentiments culminated in the Indian Rebellion of 1857, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny, which was brutally suppressed and concluded with the formal dissolution of the Mughal Empire and the transfer of power from the British East India Company to Britain itself. Power now rested in the hands of the British Crown directly, and as the 19th century continued, India's resources and the livelihoods of its people were exploited to fuel the Industrial Revolution in Britain, leading to a series of famines which shook the Indian economy to the core and left millions of Indians dead. One thing was certain: the British Empire now had millions of new subjects under its rule in India, and imperial expansion wouldn't stop there. To conclude, the political vacuum left by the Mughal Empire in the wake of repeated invasions, the failure of other Indian states, particularly the Maratha Empire, to fill that vacuum and unify India, the failure of other European powers to stop the British, Britain's military and industrial superiority, and the governing policy of the East India Company allowed Britain to take over the Indian subcontinent.
Okay.
Isha, I wanted to just add something really quickly. In the future, if you guys are going to be presenters in the future, try not to include video clips like over 5 minutes, because we want sort of the focus to be on the presenters sort of conveying the information directly rather than through video. But I think the video clip was pretty helpful in this context.
I just thought that it explained a lot of history in a really short amount of time, but yeah, I understand it was a little bit long. So moving on from that, I think
This video was made possible by.
Okay, moving on from that, sorry about that. I think whoops, what is going on? Okay, okay, I guess we can just do it this way. Let me just, okay, so moving on from that, sorry about that, guys. It seems as though the nationalism by both Pakistanis and Indians continued to thrive even after India's independence. And you could see the rise of that nationalism within the video itself. So this Indian nationalism against the British continued to thrive, and it's still thriving today. And it's thriving in a way that religious and national identity is so important, coupled by desire for sovereignty and British manipulation, which all served towards the two-nation theory. This resulted in formal partition between India and Pakistan, and it's resulted in bloodshed since that took place. So as you can see, before the partition, British India included all of this land covered by yellow here, and it looks like it's been divided into West Pakistan, India, East Pakistan, and even Burma over here used to be a part of India, which it's not anymore. So and also this island of Ceylon. But when it comes down to it, this British imperialism in its finest really did kind of facilitate the partitioning of India. And I think that it was actually planned by one of the British generals or something, that this was a plan. They wanted to divide India upon their leaving. And they divided India into a Muslim majority, Pakistan, and into a Hindu majority, India. And these two countries have been at odds since. And so many people were displaced along religious lines, because it was supposed to be that Pakistan held all the Muslims and India held all the Hindus, but that's really not how it turned out to be. We can see a lot of similarities in cultural terms. I know that a lot of the food that Indians have are the same as the foods that Pakistanis have. Even the spoken language is very similar. Spoken Hindi is very similar to spoken Urdu. The written languages do differ, and I think that that has to do with Arabic influence, but I'm not completely sure. You guys can check me on that. But I think the main thing here is that these religious and national differences that these two groups had really ended up facilitating both of these countries into a lot of violence against one another. So India's point of view concerning this violence. So present India is really concerned about the presence of terrorism supported by Pakistan, which we will be talking about later in this presentation. India claims the entire region of Jammu and Kashmir based on an instrument of accession signed in 1947. So according to this document, the entirety of Kashmir is part of India, despite the large amount of Muslims in the region. So you can see this is the area under question. This is Kashmir up here. And India asserts control over this area right here because of their rights since 1947, since the independence of India and Pakistan. This has been kind of dictated as their territory. And I think that this part was also dictated towards them. I'm not completely sure. The Pakistan occupied area and the Chinese occupied area was originally given to India after the accession signed in 1947. So most Indians, at least in my experience, have blamed British imperialism for these everlasting issues and territorial disputes over the land, because before British imperialism and before this partition, there were Hindus and Muslims living in harmony in the state of India itself. So now I'm going to have Ayn take over and explain Pakistan's points of view.
Thank you, Isha. So when I'm talking about taking the Pakistan point of view, there's some background that you guys should know about the state of Kashmir, that it was a majority Muslim population in the past during the British partition British India partition, Kashmir was a majority Muslim, but they are ruled by a Hindu ruler, whose name is Hari Singh. I don't know how to pronounce it, but so the Pakistan believes that Kashmir was illegitimately ceded to India by a ruler who did not represent his people. Because of the majority of Muslim majority states went to Pakistan, they believe that Kashmir should belong to them. That is the Pakistan point of view in terms of the legitimacy of Kashmir. And another thing that I want to tackle on is um, is how important Kashmir is to Pakistan in terms of national security, geography, and resources. So in Kashmir, there's an Indus River that flows through Kashmir and is a really important resource, especially important to agriculture in Pakistan because it rely on those river river flows. So whichever nation that have controls over the region can cut off the water supply from the other nation. So in the past, Indian army have never choked off the water supply, but in Pakistan standpoint, it remains a possibility. And they are also in Kashmir in terms of Kashmir River system. Kashmir have a potential for hydroelectric power, um, which haven't been tapped by neither of these countries. So whoever have the control of the region have get the chance to tap on that potentials of the hydroelectric power. And another point that is very important is Kashmir is the bridge that directly connect Pakistan and to China. China has been a diplomatic and military ally with Pakistan in the region, and China is in a position of economic rival compared to India. And between India and China, they have border disputes, so that somehow pushed China to become the biggest ally to Pakistan. So Kashmir remain a really strategic location for Pakistan. For example, in 1963 and 1965, Pakistan there's a valley called Saksum and Jurchet. Pakistan have give China complete control of these region. As you can see in the map here, the the yellow highlighted Saksum, yeah, so was have been given complete control by the China military. So today is significant because these regions are the points that allow China to penetrate deeply inside of Indian territory and give them an edge, in terms of the border issue with India. And another important point is because of the land link between Pakistan and China, the alliance with China has been beneficial for Pakistan in terms of economic development and also undermining Indian position in Kashmir because they have a really strong ally on their shoulder, which is China. And there is little to no point is it hard to imagine that Pakistan will give up its control of Kashmir region because in terms of, it will endanger Pakistan's border security. So this is what I have gathered from the Pakistani point of viewpoints. It's not meant to be perfect, but I would love if anyone would like to add to this.
Yeah, I think you went over it briefly, but the Pakistani controlled portion of Kashmir is especially important to China because China wants access to the Arabian Sea so that they could have access to maritime trade routes to the Middle East, to Africa, and to Europe. And so that's why in the Chinese perspective, having Pakistan control over this particular region is particularly important when it comes to getting access to maritime trade routes that otherwise they would have to travel across, or not across, like around India in order to be able to access naval routes there. So I think sort of from my understanding, they're investing in ports in Pakistan such that they're able to use the ports to then be able to access the sort of the western side of the sphere. So that's my understanding. Kevin might understand it a little differently.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. I think you got the point. So like I think it's also part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Like we invest a port in Pakistan, and basically then we have the direct access to the, I think it's called the Indian Sea, right? I think it's called the Indian Sea.
So it's like Indian Ocean and then Arabian Sea is the portion
we
of
can
the
go straight to the Europe or the Middle East. Otherwise, we have to go through the channel that's next to Singapore. And if you go through that channel, you will be under the control of the Indian Navy. There's like, I don't know its name, but there's like a Indian island, like next to like
Sri Lanka.
Very far from the mainland India. I don't know its name. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add to John's point as well. Like Kashmir, the belt and what's it called? The Belt and Routes Initiative from China also passed through Kashmir. So Kashmir is in the Silk Route that China wants to establish. So that is why Kashmir is in a really strategic location that every party wanted to have a piece of it because of its location as a bridge, a land link between many nations. So yeah. Is there anything else you guys want to add?
Yeah, guys, feel free to speak up because I also can't see your hands if you're raising them. So just, you can interrupt anytime as well. I think that you covered the Pakistani points of view really well, though, as well as Chinese points of view and why they would like access to this region. It's a very sought after region just because of its location.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if I can move forward to next discussion question.
Yeah, so now we're opening this up to discussion. This is a question posed from us to you guys. Do you think that there could be an independent state of Kashmir neutral from India and Pakistan?
Actually, I want to ask a question to this question. What do the people of Kashmir want? Do they want to be an autonomous region, or do they want to be part of India, or do they want to be a part of Pakistan, or are they sort of split over which side to join?
Yes, thank you, John, for asking this question because
no problem.
The Kashmiri perspective is the one that has been largely ignored in the discussions. People were talking about like it's a really polarizing topic whether it should be belong to India, Pakistan, but what the people want now is remain unknown because there's really split opinions in terms of whether or not it should be belong to India or Pakistan or whether it should remain independent. So yeah, so even the Kashmiri people that they the majority is unknown. What the majority people would want for themselves is unknown. But I'm sure it's safe to say that Kashmiri people are really tired of decades of conflict and bloodshed. And the reason why I formed this question is it seems to me, so coming from my background, it seems to me that an independent state of Kashmir is like the most ideal state. Is I'm not saying that it's made possible. So that's why I formed this question: whether could there be an independent state of Kashmir, so that I can I can hear from you guys' perspective on what your stance on this.
I do want to jump in really quickly and say that saying that this is an ideal situation for everyone is a little bit misleading because obviously India and Pakistan and China are all fighting over this region for a reason, their own reasons, their own national interests. So I want to be mindful of that as well. I do think that the people of Kashmir are being largely ignored between these three nations constantly debating, which is a really good point to make. What do the people of this region want? But I think what they really want is peace. And I think that peace will only come once this is resolved, once these disputes are resolved. And sometimes disputes cannot be resolved by just saying, oh, you're independent now. Sometimes disputes need to be looked into and legitimacy needs to be formed before we can find a proper solution. So that's just my take. You guys are free to jump in now. Go ahead.
Oh, Isha, I just wanted to clarify that an independent state of Kashmir, in my opinion, is the ideal. I'm not saying that it's the ideal for Kashmiri people, because definitely I am not in their position. I cannot speak for them. But for me, and yeah, it's my personal opinion that an ideal state of Kashmir would be an ideal. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's definitely opinion based.
Yeah,
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna depart just a little bit from this question because recently I heard there's something called Article 370, which for India administered portion of Kashmir, they revoked Article 370, which gives the region sort of semi-autonomous status as the ability to, form their, pass their own laws, to have their own flag. What were the reasons, if you guys know, for revoking Article 370 from the Indian government's point of view, and why, some people might be for it because they want to say be closer to India, or against it because it seems as an infringement on the rights of Kashmir autonomy. I was hoping you guys might know something a little bit more about that.
So I do know about this article. I don't have an opinion on it either way. I think that it's definitely not something I can speak on personally because I'm so Americanized. But I do think that it's a controversial issue right there because people are saying that since Kashmir is part of India by law, that they should be able to be part of India and not be sovereign from that. And they should be under the rules, laws, but also the freedoms and regulations that are administered through all of India. I think that's mainly the government's purpose of doing so. That we're all one India in that aspect. Like Kashmir is a part of India, so it should be subject to all the national identity of India as well. What do you guys think?
I think there's a lot of thought put into it before revoking Article 370 because Kashmir had its own constitution when it was integrated into India, and the reason behind it was because our then Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, just after partition, he had empathy towards the Kashmiri people, and he wanted the Kashmiri people to feel safe with the Indian Union, and that's why he allowed Kashmir to be the state which has its own constitution, has its own independence, which has a framework that would allow the people to govern themselves. But many considered that in the Indian government or in the Indian administration to be weak because it allowed Pakistanis to infiltrate the territory using surreptitious methods, using ISI, their intelligence equipment, and sending spies in and basically start creating this mujahids and terrorist extremist groups that then used to cross the border and infiltrate into Indian territory and cause chaos. I think revoking Article 370, in my personal opinion, would only improve in the Kashmiri economy, but at the same time, it would take away the Kashmiri people's identity, because Kashmiri people always have distinguished themselves from Indian people. They have made their identities clear that it's distinctive from the Indian people. Kashmiri economy is in ruins though, because it's been a war-torn region. So that's why I feel like even this could be like a bipartisan debate, like even the introduction or the incorporation of Article 370 is open to debate on both sides.
Definitely. And you bring up a lot of good reasons on why that could be.
I think, yeah. So just, can I go first? Is that okay?
Okay. Go first.
Yeah. So I wanted to directly comment on Ashton's point. So I think sort of the obvious reason, as it came into light now, is that the only reason why India, well, not the only reason, but a good reason why India revoked Article 370 in the first place is if it had a reasonable fear that the Kashmirian government was sort of moving towards the side towards Pakistan. And so it's in that advent of that situation where the Indian government is generally concerned that if Kashmir is left on its own, that it's starting to sort of side towards Pakistan more than towards India, then they would have to revoke Article 370 in that situation to make sure that the India administered side of Kashmir continues to align with sort of their envisionment for how the region's politics should turn out to be. And that also answers this question as well, in that the region, sort of idealistic speaking, would be great to be autonomous, but because of the geopolitics that are in play, it sort of makes it impossible for Kashmir to sort of, if they wanted to make alliances, for example, then other neighboring regions might go against it. And then I think Ashwin raised his hand. So Ashwin, you can speak up.
Yeah, so just to reiterate what you said, I did have a point to counter your point, which was that India had that fear much earlier, and that is why it introduced the Armed Forces AFSPA, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which gave the Indian military full autonomy over the Kashmir region, at least in the Indian-controlled Kashmir region, and this was imposed in 1990. Because of the mass exodus of Kashmiri Pandits, which were the minority Hindu community in the Kashmir region. So the mass murder of a minority in a state that's already been unstable since independence is one of the major reasons why India had to push that act through and sort of try to protect those groups within the region. So why India did this was to also enable further protection for those communities. Because what people forget is that Kashmir, although is a Muslim majority state, also has minorities in them.
Yeah, so just to speak towards the percentages, about 30% of Kashmir is Hindu and about 67% of Kashmir is Muslim. And then there's a 2% Sikh and then 1.36% Buddhist, other groups. So there is quite a large minority in itself. Almost 1/3 of Kashmir is Hindu, which is important to recognize as well. And to protect that minority, it does take some outside power. I would like to speak towards that. Like, I think that's a really good point.
Okay, so I do have an counterpoint for Ashwin in terms of supporting the Article 370. For me, the current Indian administration is right now Modi, and he's a Hindu nationalist. That's like a phrase for his administration. He is a Hindu nationalist, and as Ashwin also mentioned, the Kashmiri people always have a sense of being distinguished from India people, from India as a whole. So the fact that you revoke the Article 370, it take away this, it just create more alienation between Kashmiri people and India people. So the fact that I think that the Modi's administration in India right now doesn't help to enclose the gap between India and Kashmiri people, but just escalate it into another level, just absolute alienation between. So right now, the Kashmir people doesn't have a sense. Like the thing about the complicated problem about Kashmiri is they don't feel a sense of belonging to India as a whole, and the fact that you take away their autonomy, it feels like it just create a sense of alienation, also anti-Indian sentiment toward that. Yeah, so I'm just saying that the very ineffective policy from a Hindu nationalist administration in India create a stronger sense of alienation for the Kashmiri people. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just want to respond to that really quickly, and then after that, if Ashwin has a response, he can also say something, because I know that did bring up a counterpoint towards his point. So I think that it is important to recognize that although the people of Kashmir do have their own separate sense of national identity. It's not, I think that this is so rooted in religious difference as well, that I feel like you're characterizing the entirety of Kashmir as Muslim, and that's not true. I think that there are 30% Hindu in that community um, who are being affected by these terrorist actions, that Pakistan has really let the terrorism ensue in this region. So when it comes down to it, this act is more of a protection for the minority than it is reducing autonomy for the majority. I think that autonomy will continue to exist just because of how there is still a local there are still local entities that do have power in this region. It's not like they are dependent on India's allowing them to have those powers. I think that different regions of different country do identify differently than the country identifies. Like, for example, the United States, I know that some southern states have differing opinions from some northern states, but I think that in the end, when you think about the entire situation, it's not as much of a problem as we might think that is. I think that having one in-group or out-group in a nation is not divisive of its entire identity. I think that you can still have a national identity and be part of a bigger state. Now, Ashwin, do you have anything to say to anything?
What I wanted to add on that is I've actually visited the state of Kashmir, and the southern part of Kashmir has a predominant Hindu population, and it's much more integrated with the Indian establishment because of a few religious and historical sites in the region, Hindu historical sites in the region. I think the revoking of Article 370 also meant for the economic integration of these regions of northern Kashmir, which were earlier facing unstable and tough times. Also, Article 370 introduces ownership of land in Kashmir to all the citizens of India. This will, I think, introduce private company investment, but the problem remains that the political situation is still very unstable for that to happen. So what India did with the revoking of Article 370 was take a stronger stance that has already been taken by Pakistan, even though they have, I would like to add, like, no territorial claim in the region since the last 75 years, ever since the independence started. They have occupied that region illegally, and they're still there. The UN passed an act where Pakistan was supposed to withdraw its troops from Kashmir, and then India was supposed to withdraw its troops, and then there was supposed to be a referendum held in Kashmir by asking the Kashmiri people what they want to do, whether they want to join India, Pakistan, or have their own government. But I think 75 years into it, and having such a contested border between India and Pakistan for 75 years, the UN resolution is just too outdated. And yeah.
Yeah, I do think that there's so much political differences going on that a simple referendum is not going to control all these problems. That does kind of lead into some of our later questions. Someone else was about to speak. I think I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No. I'm just just want to add something in reply to you, Isha, that I'm do not thinking that the Kashmiri people have a sense of being different from India is because they are majority Muslim. What I'm trying to say is, as an Indian nationals, they receive more benefit from, like, Kashmiri people receive little to no attention toward their infrastructure, their public, their public infrastructure, or little to, yeah. So that's why, and I'm not.
Okay, yeah, I definitely get your point about, like, federalism, and they're not able to receive as many.
Just saying about the ineffectiveness of the Indian administration in improving the Kashmiri people's life, and also in terms of enforcing the amendment of the Article 370, it causing a lot of, like, the Indian, like, they trying to, the way, it's just the way the people execute the amendment, there has been the arrested of the political figures in Kashmir, or the cut of the lockdown of Kashmir, the electricity cut, just because of these people that they are against the amendment, they being put in a situation where they being it kind of tap into the human rights as well, because in order to enforce this amendment, somehow the Indian government violated the human rights of the people in Kashmir, by cutting the electricity, enforcing curfew, and cut out and lockdown of the city. Yeah.
Yeah, so I also heard about the blackout as well, and I think the situation in Kashmir is one where we all need to be in Ashwin's shoes, where we actually go visit the land in person to be able to witness the events for ourselves. Because I know that while I was trying to research the topic, sort of what the Western media tries to portray the situation in Kashmir as is sort of, well, at least from Vice News, where I sort of try to get a better understanding, it seems like they're trying to they put the country under a blackout after revoking Section 370. But judging from the comments, it seems like similar to Ashton's point about Kashmir Pandits and how there seems to be sort of targeting of Kashmir Pandits in the nation. So I think maybe that may be a more legitimate argument for why Section 370 is occurring. And for the sake of time, I don't know how many questions you guys have left, but I think now would be a good time to go to one final question, perhaps one that we haven't yet covered, so that we could end on that question and end the meeting from there.
Oh, Ashwin just raised his hand.
Yeah, Ashwin, could you speak up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that what the Western media says about Kashmir situation now, it's very much true. Because I had a friend visit the region this year, and it's all true about like not having enough internet and not being able to communicate properly. It's all true. So definitely the current establishment has violated human rights more than all its predecessors. And it definitely did not require the administration to be this strict. But given the political situation in Kashmir right now, the people in Kashmir are supporting, some of them are supporting really extremist people from really extremist groups who are wanted by CIA, FBI, and Indian intelligence authorities for conspiracy and instigating terrorist activities in the region.
Yeah, there is a problem of terrorism in the area. To move on from this question.
Wait, I think June raised her hand. June, did you want to say something really quickly?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry, but I have another meeting, so I'm going to be.
Oh, actually, could you spare us maybe 2 more minutes? Because before you leave, I think what we can probably do is vote for our next week's discussion topic. And I think your input is very valued in that. So do you guys have any ideas for issue topics for next week that can maybe discuss? And I have some of my own, but I want to hear your guys' first.
I think that it could be well, we're still in China, right?
Asia as a continent.
Sorry, Asia. Oh my gosh. I was thinking about a topic relating towards China, maybe if you guys wanted to explore that.
So I was thinking what we could do is maybe the Belt and Road Initiative, so like a more general dive into the Belt and Road Initiative and what it's about. Or me and June, actually, since we're, well, I'm not from Korea, but my parents are, but we're both from Korean backgrounds. We might be able to do a discussion topic on the possibilities of Korean reunification and whether or not it's actually viable for North and South Korea to reunite eventually one day, if that's something June is interested in doing.
I see.
Yeah, definitely.
Can we post all of these? Can we open a polls on UWtopia group so we can vote on this? Because right now we're in the middle of the presentation.
Okay, so we can do it after the presentation. We'll open up a poll, or maybe Anne can.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
sounds good.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye, June.
Bye, June.
Hi, thank you guys. Good job on the presentation.
Thank you.
We have a new member too, a new person too, Jaraj Singh.
Hi. Sorry, I was late.
Oh, it's no worries. Thank you. Yeah, it's good that you make it.
Oh, hi. It's totally okay. We're about to lead into our final discussion question. If you wanted to be a
Mhm.
part of that, if you know this topic, we're talking about Kashmir.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
right.
great. So, our final, well, we don't really have time for this, but our final discussion question, I think, should be, should a third party be involved to solve the conflict? And if so, which party would this be? China, the UN, the US are all viable options that you guys can bring up, pros and cons for each. And is this third party involvement analogous to British imperialism of India years ago? Do you necessarily think that a third party or Western involvement particularly is the best choice? And can we think of instances around the world where this has not worked as intended? So it's kind of a big idea, but if anyone has comments on this.
What's the process of participating here? Can I just start talking or?
You
Yeah.
can just start talking and then we can join in along with you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So with Pakistan and India claiming their territory over Kashmir, this matter was brought to UN nations' attention already, and they had suggested that that was the intervention. So there was already an intervention.
Yeah.
UN wanted an independent, what do you call that? Vote by the residents of Kashmir on this issue, but that never happened. Or the election once happened, but that was too corrupt. And then, so the current stand is that India doesn't want UN or any third party to intervene,
Mhm.
because if they intervene, they will have to take actions which India doesn't want to take. So they're saying it's a bilateral issue, but I don't think it's a bilateral issue anymore, because none of the countries have any legitimate right to call it a bilateral issue when Kashmir was never a part of any of the two nations willingly.
Yeah, so Ashwin actually brought this up earlier. It's called the referendum. And we did discuss that. So I think
Oh,
that
okay.
are you talking about, like, are you saying that the UN should not get involved for this reason?
I think what I'm trying to say is it's already involved, but the current countries, India and Pakistan, they are resisting interventions. I think a third party intervention would be a good idea.
Okay, so the UN is sort of powerless in this situation because I know that UN has been powerless in other situations all over the world. So I feel like even if they had tried to done something, it might not have gone through
Yeah.
because ultimately it's up to the countries to decide for themselves what's going to happen.
Yeah, they're not enforcing. There's no one to enforce anything on these countries.
Yeah, I think that we can think of other instances where the UN has not really been able to enforce a lot when it comes down to it. It's mainly a diplomatic thing, and this is pretty much all out violence at this point. So there's
Yeah.
a lot that has to be considered here.
Yep, like
It's
other
such a
occupations
big-
in other parts of the world, like what Israel does in Palestine, or what I think Morocco does with West Sahara.
Yeah,
None
Ashwin,
of those cases, in none of those cases has UN been
Yeah,
able to
this
do
is
anything.
this is such a big question. It's like open-ended, and the feeling I get from it is like, as to what Yuvraj said, like I don't think a third-party intervention is doing anything, or it's like an impasse, like a stalemate. You know, like nothing's being done bilaterally. Nothing's being done with third-party intervention, and it's just that I think both these countries need to take a more humanist approach towards the situation and try to mitigate the damage they have already done to the region, and try to understand and assess that, address that issue not politically but in a very humanist way. I know it's a very ideal thing to say,
no,
but
you're right. I think that we can all look at this with a humanitarian viewpoint in mind, even people from both sides of this. I think it's important to look at it that way, because when you see this violence and mass killings and things like this, it's not fun to see, and nobody really wants that for this region.
Yeah, so adding to this, you guys, I think that Kashmir conflicts are just a territorial dispute between India and Pakistan, but because of the involvement of terrorism and insurgents, it has escalated it into like a much bigger issue that, gaining the international attention. And yeah, I really do agree with you that that the third party intervention will not do shit to this conflict. And yeah.
Yeah, I think if I wanted to give some historical examples, you can think of examples such as Israel and Palestine, where sort of, even if there are many third-party interventions trying to negotiate or mediate a peaceful relationship between the two countries, notably under the Obama administration with the United States trying to sort of push back Israeli settlements in the land of Palestine. And ultimately, as you guys can clearly tell, um, with the prior Trump administration, that sort of deal fell apart. I think what's important here is not to think about the situation as a third party involvement, but thinking about what the countries or the parties that are directly involved can do. And I think ultimately the leadership, such as Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Imran Khan, it's ultimately up to them to negotiate a deal between what's going to happen to the region of Kashmir. And I think that's the only way forward. And perhaps it's going to be through a humanitarian approach that's accomplished.
But what definitely needs to happen is that Pakistan backs out starts backing out from proxy backing all these terrorist extremist groups that have been active in that region.
Yeah. I think that is a necessary step for the violence to die down as well. But another thing that we were talking about, there was this Stanford paper that laid out tons of possible mitigation issues. And one of them was that Pakistan should secularize. And I think that some of these things are very far-fetched in the current state of things. Pakistan is an Islamic state, so I don't think that would necessarily be realistic. But I think that the violence and terrorism can definitely be mitigated when it comes down to it.
This is the problem
Yeah,
with intention, though.
Sorry, Jugraj. Yeah, you were saying.
Yeah, I think it's the problem is with intent. Like, these countries are not accountable to anyone.
Yes.
They have no incentive to fix this problem.
Yeah.
Technically, UN nation exists. Sorry. Technically, UN nation exists who these countries should be accountable to. But UN nation is biased, and I think it's biased, and it doesn't have any any foresight to resolve this, or like put it out there that, okay, India, you need to remove your forces. These are the crimes against the residents that you're conducting. These are the false encounters that you're doing.
That's exactly what I was about to say, that India also needs to.
Yeah, I mean, right now, India has
Yeah.
more military in Kashmir than any other country has in any other part of the world. It's the biggest occupation right now, like especially after they removed the recent 370 clause from the constitution.
Yeah, we just discussed that article, whether or not it helped the Kashmir people or just making the Kashmiri feel more alienated from India.
Yeah, they have no internet right now as we speak. They hardly have any internet.
So the enforcement of Article 370 is really violate the human rights and everything. Cutting internet, cutting electricity, cutting everything, curfew.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the leaders don't want to fix this problem. They are getting immense political mileage out of it.
Yeah.
They get more from the existing problem than solving it.
Yeah, it seems like they are exasperating these issues in this region for their own political gain. Both sides are, in a way. They don't really want to help the people there. And I think that this comes from these two groups fighting for the longest amount of time, that they can't even focus on the people who are living there and affected by this. But and this has led to multiple human rights violations coming from both sides.
Also, I think there's like a similar right-wing nationalism, populism movement that has started in India, like the way it started in the United States.
Yes.
It has caused the youth of India to be brainwashed into thinking, oh, the Indian establishment is correct. The difference between India and Pakistan, what you got to understand is that India has a much more stable civilian government than Pakistan did in the last 75 years, which means accountability. But it has been marred with the accountability has been brought, like the Indian population in general is not questioning it because of the propaganda that has been carried out in the last 15, 20 years, which has in turn, brainwashed the Indian population and made it oblivious to what's happening in Kashmir. So I think the Indian population also needs a wake-up call, and hopefully this this meeting, when it gets recorded, uploaded on YouTube, it gets really popular.
Yeah.
Someday.
Yeah, well, I hope so as well. And actually with that, it's currently 6:11, so I'm gonna stop the recording here.